Court battles continue to plague the AmaZulu royal house. This week, the High Court in Pietermaritzburg postponed the hearing of an application by the siblings of the late King Zwelithini and other members of the royal family to set aside the appointment of Thulasizwe Buthelezi as Prime Minister. The application also serves to interdict King Misuzulu from receiving any benefits until court cases about his appointment have been finalised. I'm now joined by cultural expert and founder of Indonsa Yesizwe think tank, Professor Musa Xulu. Professor, it's always great to get your insights. Now, let's start off with the significance of the role of the traditional Prime Minister in Zulu culture, and what are the historical duties and responsibilities associated with this position?
Well, thank you very much, Hugo, and good morning. The position is very old. It dates back to pre-colonial times. But it's not a prime minister to the Zulu nation. It's a prime minister to the king. It's an advisory role. Each king will have his own prime minister. And I must emphasize that there was never a position of a prime minister to the Zulu nation. Although in the early 1990s, when the KwaZulu homeland system was about to collapse, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi started adding a prime minister to the king and the Zulu nation for obvious political reasons, because he needed a political base in the Zulu kingdom for the IFP. But it has always been a prime minister to the king. So each king will have his own prime minister. That's why when a king dies, then the new king appoints his own prime minister. If it was prime minister to the Zulu nation, there would not have been a need for each king when he dies to then start the new king start appointing. But it's an advisory post for the king, somebody that will lead the royal council those days, that will then be able to communicate between the royal council and the king and advise the king on various issues. But what happened since the 1970s and 80s and 90s as a result of the profile of the late Prince, political profile of the late Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, this position became viewed to be an extension of the IFP, because Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi was founder and president of the IFP. And many people, after the demise of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, were hoping that if it's not Prince Zwelithini Buthelezi who takes over, it will have to be somebody who does not have a political profile like Thulasizwe Buthelezi has. And I think what has happened now, His Majesty is being viewed by many people as having chosen a political side, even maybe aligning with factions within the IFP, which complicates matters in the royal family as well as in the nation.
We had talked about the traditional role of the Prime Minister, how significant it is, and you'd explained to us that the Prime Minister was not the Prime Minister of the AmaZulu nation, so to speak, but really an appointment to the office, if you will, of the King, His Majesty himself.
Yes, if you look at it in modern terms, history, for example, will tell you that King Mpande ruled from 1840 to 1872, had a prime minister called Masipula Gamamba of the Jangas. But when it came to making of public announcements, for example, he had somebody else, Mfinyele Kanguzelele of the Zulu people, who would then go out and make the announcements to the public, especially when they were in business and so on. So it's been more of a position where is a close advisor to the king, and usually it would be somebody who the king knows very well. It's not a blind kind of appointment, and would be a friend or something like that. For example, under King Shaka, the prime minister was Gomane of the Mdleje. He had come from outside of the Zulu kingdom, but he knew King Shaka very well, so Shaka called him in. Was sent by King Zwelithini to help King Shaka to rise to the throne of the Zulu kingdom. So there's a history in it. It's not like an invention of today, but They were in the late 80s and early 1990s because of the political situation and the fact that there was transition and so on. So nobody really had problems with it. But when you look at it from a historical position, it's confined to advising the king and working within the Royal Council.
Now, the appointment of Thulasizwe Buthelezi has raised much ire and a lot of conjecture. Why?
Well, I think it's two things. The first thing, as you said, in terms of the Zulu royal family, there's no consultation there. I think the king is isolated and is working alone, perfectly isolated. His own siblings sometimes have issues, and other siblings from other mothers have issues, and the Lagard and the others. So they have problems that he seems to be taking all these big decisions and is not consulting. That is the first part. The second part is the public profile of Mayor Thulasizwe Buthelezi. His public profile is such that he is a sort of very central figure in the politics of the IFP. And therefore also, IFP has got its own internal sort of segments and others opposing each other. So what will happen is that people have problems that the kingdom is going to be thrown into the internal politics of the IFP. And at the same time, going to the elections, other political parties like the ANC here in KZN are viewing this as the king assisting the IFP to win elections in KZN. I think it's not going very well. It's not going down very well in many parts of the Zulu kingdom and the province, and even among Makosi, who feel that because he's not an Inkosi, and sometimes they will have to bow down in front of him, how are they going to do that? And so there are logistical questions on appointing somebody like that.
Now, the one thing that we've picked up in the last few months is that there seems to be a continued polarization of relations within the AmaZulu family. Now, let's talk about what this challenge poses, because the king, His Majesty, should really be a unifying force, should he not? But there seems to be more and more issues that are erupting that seem to speak out against this thread of thought.
Yeah, no, definitely. The person who really supported the king from the heart was the late Prime Minister Inkosi Buthelezi, who passed on. But he knew that internally, in the Zulu royal family, there were squabbles between the siblings of the late King Zwelithini, not only between King Misuzulu and his own brothers and sisters from the same mother, but across all of the about 40 children of the late King Zwelithini. There were issues that they were uncomfortable with, and those issues really relate to behavior. And so when he rose to the throne, he immediately had opponents within the Zulu royal family. And the fact that the process itself, as the courts have found now, was not all that perfect in terms of consultations and making sure that all the houses of the royal family are represented in the meetings that nominated him. That also has created complexities to the extent that when I look at it, it will eventually be sorted out by the courts. But there's another issue that says there is an appeal that King Misuzulu and the president has made in the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein. The key to his future rests with the president of the Republic of South Africa, in this sense that depending on what kind of, for example, panel he appoints, the panel may say that they recommend that the process should be started all over again from the Zulu royal family. And that is where the real problems will start for His Majesty. I pray that he should be able to use his powers to unify not only the Zulu nation, but also to unify the Zulu royal household. It's not happening.
Now, Professor, we're talking about resolution of many of these issues, having to go to court in order to be dealt with. But in Zulu culture, how are disputes or challenges within the royal family typically resolved? Because this seems a shift away from tradition and culture.
No, it is. Although it's not for the first time that it happens. The grandfather of the present king, King Cyprian Beguzulu, his matter was also resolved by the courts in the 1940s because there were challenges from internally. So it's not the first time that it happens. However, what has happened, and I have to say this quite regrettably, there seems not to be a person bold enough in the Zulu royal household to can call upon all the 12 or so houses of the royal household together for them to be able to sit eye to eye and be able to go through their differences. With the departure of Prince Buthelezi, it has become even worse than it was before, because he was able to, although partly a member of the royal family, he was generally accepted as a very senior person who had lots of influence, not only within the Buthelezi, but also within the Zulu royal family and the kingdom, and in South Africa politically as well. So there is not, I think, at the moment, a person who can be bold enough to call the houses together. What happened yesterday, for example, a day before yesterday, the king just woke up and started signing letters, firing a chairperson of the Ngoyama Trust. I didn't know that there were two chairpersons, and then firing his spokesperson, the Prince of Ongweni. And many people now are suspecting that was the work of Thulasizwe Buthelezi. So with that kind of, because there's also this thing of Thulasizwe being IFP and Prince and others being seen as NC people. So it's going to be a mess if it moves into the political arena as it is gravitating towards that now.
Enlightening us on the AmaZulu Royal House issues, Professor Musa Xulu, appreciate your time. Always good to speak to you.